So, first of all, you don't need to wait for your server to crash before you can start fixing these problems. That's a very high stress environment. You don't want to be working under those conditions. So, what you should be doing, we like to promote this idea of continuous server analysis. And what we mean by that is looking at your server all the time. So you might not have problems now, but if you're looking at your server, monitoring it, you know what kind of resource usage your server has under normal conditions, then it really helps you spot the problems when you have an issue. Then maybe you see, well, my CPU is at 60%. Do you know that your CPU is not normally at 60%? If you're not doing this continuous server analysis, you might not know that. So it's very important to be proactive about all these issues. So we've got, what is there? You need to put into place processes to monitor, and we've got some tools to help you do that. We have the FusionReactor tool, which is an active monitoring tool that can run on your production server with a very minimal increased load. And we can help you tune and stabilize your CF servers. Maybe you should be investigating what your page performance is regularly. Again, is 1 second a usual time for your page to be generated? Maybe 100 milliseconds is normal. If you don't know these kinds of facts beforehand, then it makes it much more difficult to track what the problem is when an issue arises. We had one guy actually who, I don't think he was from a hosting company, but he called us up and he was from the US and he said, I've got 500 data sources in my ColdFusion administrator and my server's running really slow and it keeps crashing. For him it was 4 AM in the morning his time, so quite lucky that we're out in Europe and fortunately we'd opened our offices so he could call us. And effectively he was told by his manager that he was going to be fired unless this problem was sorted out. So it's definitely not the kind of environment you want to be in. You don't want managers shouting at you, telling you that you know that you've got these big problems and they must be fixed. So continuous server analysis can help you avoid that situation. And maybe why did we get into that situation in the first place? We've seen a lot of the great features about ColdFusion is that it's very, very simple to learn. You know, ColdFusion makes a lot of things really easy. Just think about doing a query, a database query. I don't know if any of you have experience with other languages, PHP, ASP. It's, you have to write a lot more code just to do a SQL query. But what that means is a lot of the technical aspects are actually hidden away from us and abstracted away from us, so we might not know or need to know some of the deeper down technical details. And sometimes if there is an issue, a very technical issue underlying the server, then we might not always have the skills or have come across that situation before. So some of the tools that are out there to try and help you. What are we talking about in a minute? One of the things that we'd always recommend is if you're in a small team, maybe you've only got 2 or 3 developers that you work with, is perhaps try and make one of them a technical lead or a technical champion, if you like. Maybe send them to a Java course or something like that, because obviously underlying ColdFusion now we've got all this Java technology and there's all these extra Java bits that we can plug into and start using. So if you have someone that knows a little bit more about Java, then perhaps they can help you and advise you. So that's always a good idea if you can make someone on your team a little bit more aware of the side of things with the Java. So some of the resources for monitoring ColdFusion, there's quite a few commercial ones, free ones, some that are specific to CF, some that aren't. Commercial one, obviously, I'd like to mention FusionReactor, have I mentioned that yet? Great server monitoring tool. That's all about monitoring your server whilst it's in production, keeping your server performing, keeping it stable, and monitoring it in its live environment, so you don't have to change any code. It gives you lots of metrics and feedback about your server without you having to do much. You just have to install a product and off it goes and does its thing. So some of the free ones, I'll break that down into what some of those free tools are, and this presentation hopefully will be available on our website after the presentation, so you can go and grab those URLs if you want to have a look at any of those tools. So logs as well, there's lots of logs. I'm sure you've probably seen and had a little bit of a look into some of the logs that are available with ColdFusion. So let's talk about where to look and what to look for. I call this the hard bit because this is where you have to get your hands dirty and start really looking into these log files and looking into server metrics. Can I just do a quick poll? Who's using Cold Fusion 8? Yeah. So if you've seen the Cold Fusion 8 server monitor, if you're on enterprise, yeah, so great tool. You can enable lots of features in there. For example, there's the start memory tracking and start profiling. But if you have used those in a production environment, you might find that you can only use those for a short period of time in the production environment. FusionReactor is designed so that it doesn't create a massive overhead on your server, so that you can leave it enabled all the time. It's designed to be enabled all the time. We actually have a server that's been up for over 365 days now. It's been up for over a year. I don't know how many of you out there are familiar with your Cold Fusion kind of server. I don't know if you're dealing with outsourced hosting or whether you're doing that in-house, but to have a server that's up for 365 days and our product is on there and it's monitoring it, you've got a ton of information there, and it's really good to have that information available and to know that you've got a product that will keep your server alive for that long. So some of the Cold Fusion logs, I'm sure we've all seen the Cold Fusion log folder. All these logs, application log, Derby log, which was introduced with CF8, if any of you are using the built-in Derby databases. You've got the event gateway log if you're doing any of that work in Cold Fusion Enterprise. 7 Enterprise, I believe they're actually in all versions of 8 now. The exception log, you've got the flash remoting gateway, so you've got logs for that. You've got all this information coming in, and maybe you've got problems with your email being sent out. You can enable the mail send log. I don't know what kind of split we've got in the room. Some people might be managers, developers, project leads. There's all this information we're gathering. But we start to think, well, hang on, there's all this information, what am I supposed to be doing with it? I might be generating gigabytes of data, of log data, but I might ever look into it. And that's something we'll come on to in a little bit. So the JRun logs, Cold Fusion out, Cold Fusion error, Cold Fusion event, who's had a look at those? Anyone open those up? Yeah? So you delve into those nasty stack traces and you've got problems, and you start to really look at the nitty-gritty of what's going on your server. So these are generated from the JRun servlet container, which is underneath Cold Fusion. What else have we got? We've got web server logs, Apache, IIS, don't know who's Linux, Solaris. Most people on Windows, are they? Yeah, a few nodding heads there, okay. Database server logs as well. Your Microsoft SQL, your Oracle even, everything's generating all this information. You've got Windows Event Viewer. I don't know how many of you found a problem and maybe you're trying to restart Cold Fusion service and it wouldn't restart. Have a look at Windows Event Viewer. It might point you in the right direction. Also, obviously, going back looking at the logs, that's a good help. Windows Performance Monitor, don't know who's enabled that, but you can get Windows Performance Monitor to track the metrics right out of JRun and Cold Fusion. And obviously the equivalents on other operating systems, you've got your Solaris and Linux logs, etc. So obviously the most important, most valuable FusionReactor logs, I'm sure you're all on the internet on your phones now buying FusionReactor. So what do we do with this data? I like to think about the scenario of CSI. I don't know who's seen CSI, but they crime scene investigators, they'll go along, there's a big problem, they don't know what's going on, but what they do is they just collect all this information, they go around, there'll be someone's leg on the floor, they'll pick that up, there's a pen lid on the floor, they don't know what that means and what the relationship is, but they'll just collect it all and have that as a repository. And then that allows them to go and look at the information, try and put it in a timeline, so you can see all the data lined up in time order and try and make sense of what this information means. And that's a really helpful analogy, if you like, because that's what we want to do in a lot of these cases. We've got all these JRun logs, Cold Fusion logs, web server logs, and there's all this information coming out of our ears, but if you've ever tried to put them all together and look at them in a timeline, then it just starts to take up an awful lot of your time when you could be developing or doing something else more productive.